Riley Many Bears knows nearly every kilometer of Siksika First Nation. It's where he first discovered his love for running, encouraged by his late grandparents.
They always told me these oral stories about us being messengers back in the day, us running from one tribe to another, just deliver messages.
With each run, a sense of pride on his ancestral land. But it's sports, he says, that saved his life.
Growing up in a very dysfunctional environment, just being around that surroundings of drugs and alcohol, teen suicide and family violence and, poverty, sports played a huge role, and it still plays a huge role to my life still to this day because, it was my escape from that environment.
That environment, the legacy of residential schools.
I'm a third generation residential school survivor. I was affected from my grandparents' trauma and also my parents' trauma as well. And I asked them, what were their ways and how they cope with residential school. They said, it was sports.
Riley took that advice and ran with it. He brought home medals from the North American Indigenous Games and gold in the 8,000 meters at the 2015 World Indigenous Games in Brazil. That experience pushed him to chase a new goal, qualifying for the Tokyo Olympics. But as the pandemic took hold, training had to take a back seat.
Let's get your temperature quick.
The 25-year-old pivoted to helping his community. Now he spends his days here at the local sportsplex that currently operates as a vaccination clinic. Still, he holds on to those Olympic dreams.
What motivates me is the Indigenous people, especially the people of Siksika, and they always tell me, just to never give up. Igakima, try hard.
I'm tremendously happy for both these guys.
But few Indigenous athletes have represented Canada at the Olympics, and Tokyo will be no different. At least one athlete who identifies as Indigenous will wear an Olympics jersey for Canada. Mohawk athlete Jillian Weir will compete in the women's hammer throw. The Canadian Olympic Committee says it can't confirm how many of its athletes are Indigenous because it doesn't currently track that data.
We've seen hardly any movement in the elite sports sector. None really at the level that we're talking about right now on the international stage.
Janice Forsyth, Director of Indigenous Studies at Western University, says Indigenous athletes in Canada face many barriers.
Racism is the obvious one, and racism happens in many forms and is meant to make people feel wholly unwelcome and push them out of sport. Organized sport is extremely expensive, especially when we talk about competitive organized sport at the elite level. And many Indigenous communities and many Indigenous families simply can't afford to engage in competitive sport.
The other big issue is access. For many remote or fly-in Indigenous communities, competition, access to coaching, and training at facilities is simply out of reach.
Perfect practice makes perfect game.
These are barriers Olympian Wani Korn Miller has advocated to change throughout her career.
I've gone to hundreds and hundreds of Indigenous communities, actually all over North America, and I know the talent that exists. And I go there and I inspire and talk about being an Olympian, and then I look at them and go, but there's no system, there's nowhere for you to go to realize that. You live in a fly-in community, and I just think that's wrong.
Canada wins the first gold medal in Pan Am water polo.
Following victory at the Pan Am Games in 1999, Horn Miller competed at the Sydney Olympics on Canada's first women's water polo team. But she looks back at that time with mixed emotions.
It's been complex, to say the least, to represent Canada. And specifically as an Indigenous person, as a Mohawk person, as someone who has been through some of the worst racism this country has ever offered, it was really complex for me.
A decade before her Olympic debut, Horn Miller would make headlines for another reason during the 1990 Oka crisis.
It was a bloody day at the Mohawk Indian community.
As a teenager, she was stabbed by a Canadian soldier's bayonet while holding her younger sister during the standoff.
For me, sport was an incredible place where I could release some of that trauma that I had gone through during the Oka crisis. It is such an important tool for my own people, but also an important tool in this country.
When you
just swimming along. I don't want you to turn your head away. If you turn your head, anything can happen.
She wants to see more Indigenous athletes get the opportunities and support she had, including her daughter, who is following in her footsteps.
This government, though in many ways they're trying, but they still are approaching Indigenous sport development in a very colonial way. And I think that they need to start understanding how to work with us to understand how our people will come together and develop this.
In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission outlined 5 calls to action for Indigenous sport. Since then, Sport Canada has committed to investing more than $53 million for Indigenous sport by the year 2022. That funding is critical for the development of athletes and Indigenous-led sporting events like the North American Indigenous Games.
It's a place to reclaim our identity and to assert who we are as Indigenous people. So this is why it's really important for the federal government to get on board and to actually create a national strategy that helps to support Indigenous-led sports.
For Riley, he has his sights set on the Paris Olympics in 2024.
I have a strong mindset and I will be there one day.
And he hopes he won't be the only Indigenous athlete to cross the finish line. Tashana Reed, CBC News, Toronto.